Undercover CEO found a waitress hiding leftover bread in her bag. What had discovered made him fall in love. From Equilibria, Maisie, May 12, 20. The wind howled through the narrow alleys of Manhattan, whipping snow against shuttered windows and dimly lit street corners. It was close to midnight, and Westfield Prime had just wrapped up its final dinner rush. Inside, the once bustling drawing room stood quiet, tables half cleared, chairs stacked against walls, and thelling a ring scent of rosemary, and seared steak still hanging in the air. Back in the kitchen, under the flickering hum of fluorescent lights, a young man in a stained apron wiped down a tray of dishes. His name was Noah. To the world, he was Noah Westfield, the CEO of thievery restaurant empire that bore his name. Tonight, no one knew that. Tonight, he was just another busboy. It was part of a secret initiative, an undercover idea born from his frustration of wanting to understand his employees, not through spreadsheets and DHR reports, but through their tired hands and unseen battles. He wanted Toasted in their shoes, even if only for a few weeks. So here he was, sleeves rolled, hands sore, heart strangely restless. As he rinsed the last of their glasses, something in the corner of his eye caught his attention. Near the back counter, half shielded by a steel prep station, a waitress was moving quickly. She was small-framed with blonde, hair tied loosely, and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in days. Laura, that was her name. It was one of the evening shift. Regulars, quiet, diligent, always the first to clock in, the last to leave. Noah froze, watching her. Laura was gathering food, not off the shelves, but from the untouched remnants on cleared plates, half a loaf of warm bread, summer-roasted vegetables. She wrapped them in napkins and placed them carefully into a faded cloth tote bag. Her hands trembled slightly, not with guilt, but with urgency. Her eyes darted around, not out of a fear of being caught, but like someone racing a silent clock. Then she whispered, soft enough that the world might have missed it, but not him. "It'll still be warm for the kids if I hurry." Noah's heart stopped. He narrowed his eyes, confused. Was she stealing or saving? Why leftovers? Why in such a hurry? Why did her face look like it had weathered 1,000 storms before midnight? Instinctively, Noah stepped forward. But something in her voice, so fragile, so intimate, held him back. It wasn't the whisper of a thief. It was the whisper of someone trying not to break. A cold memory rose within him, sharp and sudden. 3 years ago, Noah stood at the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge, a man unrecognizable from the one today. Broken by grief, numbed by betrayal, hollowed out by the weight of legacy he never asked for. His parents had passed in a tragic accident, and he had inherited an empire he never felt worthy to lead. That night, he had walked to the bridge with no intention of walking back, and then someone had stopped him. Not with questions, not with judgment. Just a soft hand offering a small warm loaf of bread, and a whisper that would haunt and save him all at once. "Tomorrow is still a gift. Please don't give it back." He never saw her face. She had left as quietly as she came. But he had lived because of that one act. And now, years later, standing in the dim light of a kitchen he'd built from ashes, Noah watched. Another girl wrap bread with the same tenderness, the some urgency. A part of him awked. What if she's like her? What if someone out there's still saving lives with nothing but kindness? He wondered, his throat tight. He didn't confront Laura. He didn't report her. He just stood there in the shadows, watching the kitchen doors swing open as she disappeared into the cold night, her bag clutched tightly to her side. And as the door clicked shut behind her, Noah whispered to himself, the words barely audible over the buzz of the light above. "I need to know who she is and why." I saw a hope in a girl hiding leftover bread. The next few nights, Noah found himself watching Laura with silent curiosity. He told himself it was just to protect their restaurant, that maybe, just maybe, she was taking leftovers to sell, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was something in her eyes that haunted him, something that reminded him of the version of himself that once stood on a bridge, waiting for no tomorrow. So he waited and he watched Thursday came with rain, cold slanted needles of it slicing through the city like broken glass. The kind of rain that seeps into your bones and makes you question your choices. Laura clocked out just past 11. Noah, still in disguise, slipped out minutes later. He kept his distance, trailing her from across the street beneath the hood of his coat. She didn't head home. Instead, she turned into an alley, then ducked under a crumbling awning that barely shielded a bench. There, huddled together under threadbare blankets, were two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 6. Then, pale, shivering, Noah's breath caught in his chest. Laura knelt beside them. She pulled out her tote bag and unwrapped a container of soup and the bundle of bread he had seen her pack earlier. She didn't eat, not a bite. Instead, she tore the bread gently into halves and blew softly on the steaming soup before holding it out. "Small sips, okay?" she whispered, "and chew slow. Baby, I'll try to bring more next week." The boy nodded sleepily. The girl leaned her head against Laura's shoulder, murmuring something too soft to hear, and there it was. No cameras, no audience. Just one woman soaked in rain, offering warmth to children the world had forgotten. Noah took a step back, shame clawing at his chest. All this time he had wondered if she was stealing, but she was giving. From the little she had, she was still giving. He looked closer now, not at the food, no at the bag, but at her face. There was exhaustion there. Yes, but also light, strange, quiet grace, the kind that doesn't scream for attention. The kind that saves lives quietly, just like the girl on the bridge. Hess stood for a while, hidden behind the edge of the alley as the rain softened into a steady drizzle. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Back home in his penthouse high above Thessaly, the view had never felt so empty. Noah stared out at the skyline, but all could see was a soaked girl wrapping a child in her coat. Poured himself a glass of scotch, but it tasted like guilt. He lay on his bed, but it felt like stone. The next evening, Noah arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. When the kitchen staff began clearing unused appetizers, fresh but unserved, he spoke up. "Hey," he said, "Tuth sous chef, mind setting those aside? Think there's a local shelter. Picking up surplus now?" The chef raised an eyebrow. That a new policy? Noah smiled slightly. Not official for now. From that night on, Laura began finding neatly packed containers labeled staff meal extras in the break room fridge. Sometimes more than she expected, sometimes still warm. She never asked questions, but she always whispered, "Thank you." In particular, and Noah just watched. He stayed behind extra hours just to wipe counters near her, just to listen. Slowly, gently, he saw her walls come down. One night during cleanup, Laura sat on an averted crate, rubbing her ankle. Her shoes were worn thin. Noah handed her a clean towel and sat beside her. "Tough day?" he asked. She lied softly. "Only about as tough as a Monday in wet socks can be. Hetcha cold." Then after a pause, he asked, "Why do you do it?" "For those kids." Laura looked up. Her expression softened. "Because someone once savoned," she said, "with nothing but bread." The revelation was undeniable. Laura wasn't a thief. She was a guardian, a silent warrior in rain-soaked clothes, feeding the forgotten, with scraps of compassion. And Noah, who had built an empire from second chances, now realized she might be the reasons OSO Miona else gets a first. From that rainy night onward, something inside Noah shifted. He didn't just watch Laura anymore. He moved with quiet intention. Each morning before the restaurant opened, he would have a discreet word with the head chef. "Keep any items close to expiry aside," he'd say casually. "Label them staff compost," Ifanon asks. When asked why, he shrugged. Better than throwing good food out. Might help someone. And each night, Laura would find a little more in her bag. It's perfectly edible mistakes. Stale pastries. Vegetables too ripe for presentation, but still fresh. Own evening, when she looked around in surprise. Noah met her eyes from across the kitchen and gave the faintest nod. She didn't smile, but her eyes said more than words. As days turned into weeks, their paths crossed more often, and not by accident. Sometimes Noah would pretend to be too tired to keep scrubbing pans and sit near the exit door, rubbing his forehead. Sometimes Laura would join him silently, then gradually with stories. Stories of other regulars, the funny things children said, the older woman who tipped her with origami cranes folded from dollar bills. He never pried, but he listened closely. And then one night it happened. It was near closing. Kitchen was quiet, lit only by the glow of the dishwashing station. The rain petulantly against the window. Noah sat on an old crate, breathing heavily after a long shift. Laura walked in with a stack of rags, then stopped. Seeing him there, tired, slouched, silent, she sat beside him. Neither said anything. For a moment, then without looking at him, she whispered, "Tomorrow is still a gift. You know, even the worst day ends." Noah's entire body froze. He turned to look at her slowly, eyes wide. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. She glanced at him, confused by his expression. "It's just something I say. Something I once told a stranger who looked like he was about to disappear." Noah's throat tightened. His mind raced back to that freezing night on the Brooklyn Bridge, to a loaf of bread pressed into his hand, to a whisper that had cracked through the numbness. Tomorrow is still a gift. No one else could have known. No one else had said it. He stared at her now, really stared. The curve of her jaw, the softness in her voice, the quiet strength in her gaze. It was her. Could it really be? For the next few days, Noah watched her differently. Not with suspicion, not with pity, but with a tenderness that caught him off guard. He began noticing the way her hands trembled slightly when she was exhausted, how she always gave customers a little extra whipped cream even if they didn't ask, how she'd sing softly under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Replayed that night on the bridge over and over, searching for tales he had long buried. The wind, the snow, the girl's voice, Laura Swa. It had to be her. Yet he said nothing. Not yet. Because how do you tell someone they once saved your life without sounding like a ghost from a chapter they forgot they wrote? So instead, he stayed close. He shared extra laughs during prep. He made jokes about his dream of opening a soup kitchen. He started humming the same tune she always sang and pretended it was coincidence when she noticed. And Laura, she began to smile more. She sat longer at the end of each shift. She even asked him one night teasingly, "So, mystery dishwasher, what did you do before bussing tables? You're way too clean to be new?" He just smirked and said, "Would you believe me if I said I used to be lost?" She blinked, unsure how to respond. But he meant it in every way. Noah's heart was no longer guessing. It was remembering. And in Laura's quiet compassion, in her echo of Faye long-forgotten night, he began to realize she wasn't just someone he admired. She was someone he had been waiting to find again. Over time, the silence between them began to change. It was no longer the kind that sat awkwardly between strangers, but thinking that settled comfortably between two people who had started to see each other, not just through what was spoken, but through what was carried beneath the surface. Some nights after closing, Laura would linger a little longer. Noah found himself waiting for those moments, not because he planned to, but because something in him hoped for them. There was something grounding in her presence, something honest. One night, as they sat near the back exit, sharing the last of the lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, Laura turned to him with aqueous vulnerability in her eyes. "Do you ever wonder how different your life would be if just one moment had changed?" she asked, not looking at him directly. "All the time," Noah replied. She gave a soft laugh, then paused. "I lost my mom in a car crash when I was 17. After that, it was just me." Her fingers traced the rim of the coffee cup. "I had to grow up fast. Worked nights, skipped college, paid rent with tips." Noah stayed quiet, letting her speak. "Once," she continued, her voice seductant, "I saw this man on the Brooklyn Bridge. He looked empty, like he wasn't really there." Noah's breath caught, but he kept his expression still. "I didn't know what to do," Laura said. "I was carrying some bread from work, and I just handed him one. Told him something me mom used to say when things got bad, then I walked away." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I never knew if he lived." "I hope he did." Noah's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to say something, everything. But the words caught behind the weight of emotion swelling in his chest. He couldn't tell her. Not yet, because this wasn't a moment to reclaim. It was a moment to understand her fully, gently, truthfully. Laura reached into her bag, then rummaging for something. "I kept this," she said, pulling out a small, weathered photograph. She held it out to him. Noah took it with trembling fingers. It was a blurry shot taken from a phone camera with shaking. Hands, in the image, the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge, the dim glow of streetlights, and a faint silhouette of a man in a dark coat staring out over the water, his back turned, just a shadow, but Noah recognized it instantly. It was him. The night. Everything almost ended. The night everything quietly began again. He looked up at Laura, who was watching him, not with expectation, but with ass-offness that broke his heart. She didn't know, but she had kept this moment, carried it with her, just as he had. The photo back gently. "That's a powerful thing to hold on to," he said, his voice low. Laura tucked it away carefully. "It reminds me that even if we never know the end of someone's story, we might have helped write the next chapter." Noah couldn't look away from her. She had saved him. Somehow, without knowing, she was still doing it one quiet night at a time. The shift had started, like any other. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the air, and Laura moved through Ruth's dining room with her usual quiet grace. But something shifted, something she couldn't quite name. It happened in the break room during a lull before the dinner rush. Laura was refilling the sugar caddies when two co-workers strolled in chatting. "I still can't believe the CEO was here in disguise," one of them said, chuckling. "Noah Westfield washing dishes and bussing tables like the rest of us?" Laura froze. The air changed. "Did you see the press release?" The other replied. "It's going viral. It's undercover CEO experiences life behind the apron. Classic PR move. I gotta say, he fooled all of us." They walked out, still laughing. Laura stood completely still. The packet of sugar fell from her hand. It couldn't be true, but deep down, something clicked. The way Hellways lingered near the chef, subtle decisions that made her nights a little easier, questions he never quite asked, but somehow already knew the answers to the connection. She thought was built on shared struggle, no felt like something else. Something watched, something staged. She found Noah near the back of the kitchen, wiping down counters like always. But this time, when he looked up and smiled, something in her eyes stopped him cold. "You're Noah Westfield?" she said quietly. He didn't deny it. Didn't try to explain right away. Just nodded. "I was," he said, "and I am." Silence stretched between them like a cracking glass. Laura's voice trembled. Not with rage, but with something heavier. "Gave you my truth," she whispered, "while you wore a mask." Noah took a step forward, but she backed away. "I never lied to you," he said, his voice low. "Everything I felt, everything I shared, it was real." "But it wasn't Teagle," she said. "What did you? You knew everything about me, my stories, my past, my pain. And all that time, you already had the ending written." "It wasn't like that, wasn't it?" Her voice cracked. "You saw me when I was vulnerable. You let me open up, and you just stood there, hiding behind a role you chose to play." She looked at him as if seeing a stranger. I thought you were different." She said, "The first person who didn't look at me like I was broken or small or charity." Her hands clenched at her sides. "But now, I wonder if any of it was real." Not true to speak, but she turned away. "I need space," she said, almost to herself. "Don't know who I was talking to anymore." And just like that, shoot out. Past the kitchen, past the doors, into the cold night. Noah didn't follow because for the first time since he met her, he didn't know what to say. He had built a life trying to understand people from behind a name. But the one person who truly saw him now felt like she'd been deceived. He stood there alone, the warmth of Thekachin suddenly cold, the air thick with the silence she left behind. And for the first time in years, he felt the kind of helplessness that no power, no title, and no plan could fix. Oh, the rain had returned. Thin sheets of it slid down hospital windows, turning the sit outside into a blur of gray and motion. Thunder rumbled softly in the distancias, if the sky itself couldn't sit still. Inside the pediatric wing of St. Mark's Hospital, fluorescent lights hummed overhead and machines beeped instead of rhythmic patterns. Tiny reminders that life was still fighting, still present, in room 204. A small boy lay curled beneath thin white sheets, his chest rising and falling with difficulty. His breaths were shallow, his lips pale. The oxygen mask over his nose seemed too big for his fragile face. He looked up at his French fry as the French cocktail's end. Laura sat by City Heem, her hands wrapped tightly around his. Her coat was soaked through from earlier, the edges dripping onto Theffler, but she hadn't noticed. Her blonde hair was damp, clinging to her cheeks. Her eyes, red-rimmed and raw, were fixed on the boy's face with a kind of silent desperation that had long passed panic. Now she was in the space band. Fear, that still place where hope and helplessness lived side by side, he had collapsed that afternoon. 1 minute they were under the awning of the shelter where she sometimes brought food. The next, he was doubled over, coughing so hard his small body trembled, a thin line of blood staining the sleeve of his too thin hoodie. Without thinking, Laura had scooped him bento her arms and run 3 long blocks through the rain, weaving between traffic. Shouting for help, now hours later, she sat here, cold, tired, alone, and powerless. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed, his white coat crisp, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm sorry," he said again, lowering his clipboard. "But without proof of guardianship, we can't administer further treatment. Consent must come from an authorized adult." "I am his adult," Laura said, her voice from hours of pleading. "They have no one else. No parents. No paperwork. Just me." The doctor looked at her, sympathy flickering behind his glasses. But it was sympathy, not permission. "I understand," he said softly. "Truly but legally. Our hands are tied." Laura blinked rapidly, the tears pushing forward now. Not from sadness, but from the sharp ache Offbung told once again that love wasn't enough. That all her effort, all her sacrifice, meant nothing without a signature. She leaned forward, her forehead brushing the boy's knuckles. "I promised I wouldn't let anything happen to you," she whispered, prime-eyed. Then, suddenly, a voice from the doorway. "Oh, sign." Laura turned sharply. The doctor did too. Noah stood there, his coat heavy with rain, his hair dripping down the side of his face. He looked nothing like the man who once walked through boardrooms and fundraising galas. His tie was gone, his shoes soaked, and yet there was a stillness about him now, a clarity. He stepped forward slowly, not with authority, but with intent. "I'll take responsibility," he said. "Get whoever you need. I'll cover everything. Just please help him." Laura rose from her chair, stunned. "How? How did you know where I was?" "I asked around," he said, his voice low. "You didn't show up for your shift. Someone saw you running. I followed the storm." She stared at him, unsure what to say. She had not called him, had not even thought to, but he had come. The doctor nodded and stepped out. Within minutes, a private physician was called. Noah signed the necessary forms, vital swear taken, an IV inserted, oxygen adjusted. The boy began to stabilize, and then finally silence. Laura collapsed back into her chair, drained by words. Noah didn't speak. He simply lowered himself into the chair beside her. Carefully, quietly, as though afraid the moment might break if he moved too fast. Time passed. Nurses came and went, monitors beeped, but neither of them left that room. At some point, Laura's hand slid down the side of the chair, fingers barely grazing thermrest. Without thinking, Noah reached out and took it, not as a man, trying to fix things, but as someone who understood that presence mattered more than power. She did not pull away. She did not speak. But in that simple act of holding hands, something shifted, something let go. And when their fingers laced, something inside her finalely exhaled. Noah turned toward her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "You once gave me bread," he whispered, his voice cracking just slightly. "I want to give you every sunrise I have left." It was not a promise of rescue, not a declaration of status or wealth. It was an offering of himself, of time, of showing up. And for the first time since his truth had come to light, Laura looked at him not as the CEO she had once felt deceived by, but as the boy on the bridge, the one she had once saved with nothing but kindness, who had come back years later to return the favor. Weeks passed. The little boy recovered slowly, quietly, and Laura, who had once moved through life like a shadow, now had someone walking beside her at a respectful distance, but always close enough for her to feel it, noted it, try to fix her world. Just stood in it. One morning, she found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a letter, official, embossed, and addressed to her. He read it twice before her knees gave way. It was a full scholarship, Bachelor of Social Work, all tuition and expenses covered, recommended personally by Noah Westfield. When she confronted him about it, half in disbelief, half in awe, hadn't make a grand gesture. He just said, "You spent your life giving to others. It's time someone gave to you." Laura stared at him, her voice small. "You never asked for this, he said. "That's why you deserve it." A week later, Laura stood in the university library holding the registration form. Her fingers trembled over the page. The rows of books, the silence of study, the gentle hum of potential. It all felt overwhelming, like stepping into a life that, did it belong to her yet? She looked over her shoulder. Noah was there across their room, not approaching, just watching, letting her choose. She turned back to the form and signed her name. The next surprise came on a quiet Saturday morning. Received an email with a subject line that simply read, "Lors tomorrow, executive appointment." Attached was a letter from the Westfield Foundation offering her the position Afrogram, director for a new initiative aimed at supporting at-risk youth single caregivers and underfunded shelters. The name of the program was hers, literally. Dashi showed up at his office, not the restaurant, but the sleek high-riser in Midtown holding the printed letter with shaking hands. "Noah," she said, standing in the doorway. "What is this?" He looked up, then slowly walked over. "I started it for you," he said plainly, "because I've seen what you do with scraps. I can't imagine what you'll do with support." Laura didn't speak, her eyes. "Well, I don't want to put you in a box," he continued. "This isn't charity, it's acknowledgement. You've always had the heart. Now you'll have the tools." Her voice cracked. "You've always lived up high, Noah." He looked at her. "And I'm still learning how to trust the ground again." Didn't smile. He didn't take offense. He simply admitted, because she was right. There were still miles between them, years off difference, of status, of how they'd been forced to survive. The gap was closing, not with declarations, but with quiet, consistent showing up. Noah took a step back. "This doesn't come with pressure," he said. "If you want it, it's yours. If you it'll still carry your name, because whether you're at a podium or a park bench, you've already changed more lives than I ever could." Laura held the letter against her chest. For once, the ground beneath her didn't feel like it would collapse. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe she was allowed to dream. A year later, the ballroom of the Westfield Foundation shimmered with warm light and quiet allegiance. It wasn't extravagant. Laura had insisted on that. No crystal chandeliers or velvet drapes, just simple lights, long tables lined with candles, and framed photos of smiling children, caregivers, and volunteers who had been touched by the work of Laura Stamro. The foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. What began with a single idea, empowering those who gave everything, even when they had nothing, had become a citywide movement. And at its center was Laura. She stood backstage, her palm slightly damp, the speech in her hand crumpled at the edges. Noah waited nearby, but didn't speak. He just smiled gently, as if reminding her, "You've already done a hard part. Just breathe." When her name was announced, Laura stepped into the light. A quiet hush fell over the room. Golden light cascaded down her shoulders, setting her hair aglow like fire and sun. For a moment, she looked almost unreal. But the warmth in her eyes reminded everyone this was Summy and Ariel. Someone who had walked through rainstorms, not red carpets. She approached the podium, hands steady now, voice clear. "I used to bring bread," she began, her voice echoing softly, quietly, secretly, as I thought that was all I had to give. She looked out at the crowd, at the children who now had homes, at the single mothers Wano had jobs, at the men and women who had found dignity in second chances. "Today I bring hope." The audience rose to their feet in silent applause. There were no cheers, no shouting, just the sound of hearts standing in reverence for something greater than success. Laura stepped back from the microphone, a small smile on her lips when she noticed Noah walking toward her from the front of the stage. But he wasn't alone. In each hand, he held the tiny fingers of two children. It's the same two she had fed that rainy night behind the restaurant, now clean, healthy and whited, in small suits and dresses. He led them up beside her, and then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, simple velvet black. He opened it slowly. Inside was a silver necklace, delicate and understated, with a single phrase engraved on the pendant. "Tomorrow is still a gift." Noah looked up at her, voice low. "But sure, you saved me once," he said. "And I've spent every day since trying to live in a way that would make that moment worth it." He took a breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Let me spend the rest of my life deserving it." Aura's lips trembled. Sheer reached into the inside pocket of her blazer, carefully, tenderly, and pulled out something small, wrapped in tissue, yellowed from time. She unwrapped it and was a piece of old bread, hardened, preserved. The same bread she had once offered to a broken stranger on a bridge. "I capped it," she whispered, "in case I ever saw you again." Noah smiled, tears glistening at the edge of his eyes. He didn't drop to one knee, didn't need to, because this was never about tradition or spectacle or public approval. It was about coming full circle, about promises unspoken but lived, about two people who had once only had scraps of bread, of time, of belief. And Woe had now found something whole, something lasting. The crowd didn't erupt. They simply stood, many with hands over hearts, as Laura leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently to his. Noah held her, not tightly, not possessively, just enough to say, "I'm here." And when she finally nodded, eyes closed, necklace pressed between them, it was yes. A yes not shouted but lived. A yes not to perfection but to presence. A yes to all that tomorrow Steve had once feared wouldn't come. But had together some stories aren't about grand gestures or perfect endings. They're about quiet moments, shared kindness, and the courage to show up when it matters most. Noah and Laura's journey reminds us that even a simple piece of bread can carry the weight of hope, and that sometimes love begins not with compromise, but with a whisper in the dark. If this story touched your heart,